Marcus Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished stocking the last shelf of canned goods in his small corner store. The clock on the wall showed 9:47 p.m., and he was already 13 minutes past his usual closing time. The neighborhood wasn't the safest after dark, but Marcus had been running this store for 8 years, and he knew every face that walked through his doors. At 34, Marcus had never served in the military, never held a gun, and had only been in 2 fights in his entire life, both in high school. He was what most people would call an ordinary man. Average height, slightly overweight from too many late-night sodas and convenience store snacks, with calloused hands that spoke of honest work rather than combat training. The bell above his door chimed as a customer walked in. Marcus looked up from his register and saw a man he'd never seen before. The stranger was tall, lean, with short-cropped hair and the kind of posture that screamed military even in civilian clothes. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, but there was something about the way he moved that made Marcus take notice. "We're actually about to close," Marcus called out, but not unkindly. "But if you need something quick, that's fine." The man nodded and headed toward the back of the store where Marcus kept the energy drinks and water. As he walked, Marcus noticed the man's eyes constantly scanning the store, the windows, the exits. It was a habit Marcus had seen in some of his regular customers who were veterans, always aware, always watching. "Take your time," Marcus added, turning his attention back to counting the day's receipts. The register had been acting up lately, and he needed to make sure everything balanced before he could go home to his small apartment upstairs. Outside, the street was quieter than usual. The bodega across the street had closed an hour ago, and most of the residential lights were already off. Marcus liked this time of night when he could work in peace, organizing his store and preparing for the next day. It was his meditation, his way of unwinding from dealing with customers, suppliers, and the dozens of small problems that came with running a small business. The military-looking customer was taking his time in the back of the store. Marcus could hear him moving around, probably reading labels or checking prices. These types of customers were usually very particular about what they bought. Marcus had learned to be patient with them. A second chime from the door made Marcus look up again. 3 men entered, and immediately Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen these faces before, not in his store but around the neighborhood. They had the look of trouble, the kind of guys who hung around street corners and made honest people cross to the other side of the road. The first man, clearly the leader, was wearing a red hoodie despite the warm evening. He had tattoos covering his neck and the kind of aggressive swagger that Marcus recognized as dangerous. The other 2 flanked him, one short and stocky, the other tall and thin with nervous energy. "Yo, old man, we need to make a withdrawal," the leader said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Marcus's heart started beating faster. In 8 years of running the store, he'd been robbed twice. Both times he'd cooperated completely, handed over the money and filed police reports that went nowhere. He'd learned that his life was worth more than whatever cash was in his register. "I'm closing up," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The register is almost empty, but you can have whatever's there." Nah, the leader said, stepping closer to the counter. "We know you got more than that. We've been watching this place. You do good business here." Marcus glanced toward the back of the store where the military customer was shopping. The man had gone very still, and Marcus realized he was listening to every word. Marcus hoped he would stay hidden, maybe slip out the back door if there was trouble. "Look, guys," Marcus said, raising his hand slightly, "I don't want any problems. Like I said, you can have what's in the register. There's maybe $80. The short, stocky man laughed. $80? That's insulting, man. We know you got a safe in the back. We know you keep the real money somewhere else." Marcus did have a safe, but it contained important papers, not cash. He kept most of his daily earnings in a bank deposit bag that he took to the bank every morning. These guys clearly didn't understand how small businesses actually worked. "There's no safe with money," Marcus said truthfully. "This isn't that kind of operation." The leader's expression darkened. "You think we're stupid? You think we didn't do our homework?" Marcus could feel the situation escalating. The 3 men spread out slightly, blocking his path to the door. The leader reached into his hoodie pocket, and Marcus caught a glimpse of metal. His mouth went dry. From the back of the store, Marcus heard a soft footstep. The military customer was moving, but Marcus couldn't see him. He hoped the man was smart enough to stay hidden or find a way out. The last thing Marcus wanted was for an innocent customer to get hurt because of his problems. "I'm going to open the register," Marcus said slowly, reaching for the keys. "You can see for yourself what's there." "Smart man," the leader said, but his hand stayed in his pocket. "And then you're going to show us where you really keep the money." As Marcus turned the key in the register, he caught a reflection in the security mirror mounted in the corner. The military customer was positioning himself behind an aisle, moving with deliberate, silent steps. The man's entire demeanor had changed. He was no longer a casual shopper, but something else entirely. Marcus realized with growing dread that this situation was about to become much more complicated than a simple robbery. The register drawer opened with its familiar ding, and Marcus began pulling out the bills with shaking hands. Mostly ones and fives, a few tens, and two $20 bills. Just like he'd said, about $80 total. "That's it?" the tall, thin robber asked, craning his neck to see into the drawer. "You're kidding me." "I told you," Marcus said, stepping back from the register. "This is all there is." The leader's face twisted with anger. "You're lying. Nobody runs a store like this with only $80. He pulled his hand from his pocket, revealing a knife with a 4-inch blade. "Maybe you need some motivation to remember where the real money is." Marcus's eyes widened. In his previous robberies, the thieves had been satisfied with the register money and left quickly. These guys were different, more aggressive, more desperate, and clearly not planning to leave without a fight. "Please," Marcus said, backing toward the wall behind the counter. "I swear to you there's no safe with money. I bank the deposits every morning. I can show you my records." "Records can lie," the stocky man said, moving around the counter toward Marcus. "But pain don't lie." That's when the military customer made his move. Marcus heard it before he saw it, the soft scuff of a boot, followed by a sharp intake of breath from the tall robber. The man spun around just in time to see the customer stepping out from behind the potato chip display. "Gentlemen," the customer said calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." His voice was steady, controlled, with the kind of authority that came from years of commanding respect. He stood relaxed but alert, his hands visible but ready. Marcus noticed that despite his calm demeanor, the man's eyes were constantly moving, calculating angles and distances. "Who the hell are you?" the leader demanded, pointing the knife in the new direction. "Just another customer," the man replied, "but I heard raised voices and I thought maybe I could help resolve this peacefully." The stocky robber laughed nervously. "You picked the wrong night to play hero, army boy. This ain't your fight." "Actually," the customer said, taking a small step forward, "I think it became my fight the moment you pulled that knife." Marcus watched in fascination and terror as the customer continued to advance slowly. There was something about his movement that reminded Marcus of documentaries he'd seen about predators. Patient, deliberate, completely confident. The leader was getting agitated. "Back off, man. This don't concern you. Walk away and nobody gets hurt." "I'm afraid I can't do that," the customer said. "See, I took an oath once to protect people who can't protect themselves. Old habits die hard." That's when Marcus realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just any military veteran. This was someone special, someone trained for situations exactly like this. The way he moved, the way he talked, the complete absence of fear in his voice. Marcus had seen enough war movies to recognize the real thing when he saw it. The thin robber was getting nervous. "Man, let's just take the money and go. This is getting too complicated." But the leader was beyond reasoning. The appearance of the customer had challenged his authority, his control of the situation. "Nobody tells me what to do in here," he snarled, taking a step toward the customer. "That's where you're wrong," the customer said, and suddenly his voice carried a different quality, harder, colder, with the unmistakable tone of someone who had killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, feeling like he was watching a nature documentary where a house cat had wandered into a lion's territory. The three robbers clearly didn't understand what they were dealing with, but Marcus was beginning to. The stocky robber moved first, lunging around the counter toward the customer. What happened next was almost too fast for Marcus to follow. The customer sidestepped with fluid grace, grabbed the robber's wrist, and twisted. There was a sharp crack followed by a scream of pain. The stocky man dropped to his knees, clutching his broken wrist. "Jesus," the thin robber shouted, pulling out his own knife. "He broke Tony's arm!" The customer remained perfectly calm. Actually, it was just his wrist. "He'll heal in 6 to 8 weeks if he gets proper medical attention." The leader's eyes were wild now. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" "We got you outnumbered." 2 to 1, the customer corrected mildly. "And one of those two is holding a knife with his non-dominant hand because I can tell by how he's gripping it that he's right-handed but drew with his left. That suggests he's nervous, which makes him unpredictable but also sloppy." Marcus realized that the customer wasn't just controlling the physical situation, he was getting inside the robbers' heads, analyzing them, breaking down their confidence with clinical precision. The thin robber looked at his knife hand and cursed. The customer was right. He was holding it awkwardly, switching it between hands nervously. "You're really starting to piss me off," the leader said, advancing with his knife extended. "I don't care what kind of special forces ninja you think you are." "A knife is a knife." "True," the customer agreed, "but training is training and experience is experience. And right now you're bringing a knife to what's essentially a gunfight. Except the gun is my 2 decades of learning exactly how to take knives away from people who don't know how to use them properly." Marcus could see that the customer was trying to de-escalate through intimidation, hoping the robbers would realize they were outmatched and leave. But the leader was too proud, too angry, and probably too high on something to think clearly. "We'll see about that," the leader snarled, and lunged forward with the knife aimed at the customer's chest. What Marcus witnessed next would replay in his mind for years to come. The customer moved like water, flowing around the knife thrust, grabbing the leader's wrist and elbow simultaneously. There was a brief struggle, a sharp twist, and suddenly the leader was on the ground, his knife skittering across the floor. But the thin robber, in a panic, charged from the side. And that's when Marcus made the decision that would change his life forever. Marcus saw the thin robber charging from the side while the customer was still dealing with the leader on the ground. Without thinking, without analyzing, without considering the consequences, Marcus acted on pure instinct. He vaulted over the counter. It wasn't graceful. Marcus wasn't an athlete, and his extra weight made the movement clumsy and loud, but he managed to get between the charging robber and the customer, just as the thin man raised his knife. "Look out," Marcus shouted, throwing his arms up to protect the customer's back. The knife caught him in the shoulder first. Marcus felt the blade punch through his shirt and into muscle with a sensation that was more shocking than painful, at least at first. The thin robber's eyes widened in surprise. He'd expected to stab the military customer, not the store owner. "What the hell?" the robber started to say. But Marcus grabbed his knife hand instinctively, trying to pull the weapon away. That's when the pain hit. Fire shot through Marcus's shoulder as the knife twisted, but he held on, grappling with the robber. Behind him, he could hear the customer finishing with the leader, the sound of someone hitting the floor hard. The thin robber panicked. He was face to face with a man he'd planned to rob, not fight hand to hand. In his desperation, he pulled the knife free and struck again, this time catching Marcus in the ribs just below his right arm. Marcus gasped, feeling the air rush out of his lungs, but he didn't let go. Some primal part of his brain had taken over, the part that didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. The customer had been trying to protect him, and now Marcus was returning the favor. The third stab came when they both went down. Marcus and the robber fell backward, crashing into a display of breakfast cereals. Boxes of cornflakes and granola scattered everywhere as they hit the floor. The robber's knife found Marcus again, this time in his left side just above his hip. This time, Marcus screamed. The customer was on them in an instant. Marcus saw a blur of movement, heard the robber cry out, and then suddenly the knife was gone and the thin man was unconscious on the floor beside him. "Jesus Christ," the customer said, dropping to his knees beside Marcus. "Why did you do that?" Marcus tried to answer, but his voice came out as a wheeze. He was lying on his back among the scattered cereal boxes, and he could feel warmth spreading across his shirt. The store's fluorescent lights seemed too bright, making everything look harsh and unreal. "Don't try to talk," the customer said, his voice taking on a professional tone. "I need to assess your wounds." Marcus felt hands moving over his body, gentle but firm, checking the stab wounds with obvious medical training. The customer's fingers found the shoulder wound first, probing carefully. "Shoulder's not too bad," the customer murmured, more to himself than to Marcus. "Missed the major arteries. The rib shot looks clean. Probably didn't hit anything vital." When he got to the third wound, just above Marcus's hip, his expression darkened. This one's deeper. I need to apply pressure. The customer stripped off his black t-shirt, revealing a torso covered in scars that told stories Marcus couldn't even imagine. He pressed the shirt against Marcus's side, and the pressure sent new waves of pain through his body. I know it hurts, the customer said, but I need to slow the bleeding until the ambulance gets here. Ambulance? Marcus managed to whisper. I called 911 while I was dealing with these idiots, the customer explained, nodding toward the 3 robbers who were all on the floor in various states of consciousness and injury. Should be here any minute. Marcus tried to look around. The leader was sitting against a shelf, holding his head and looking dazed. The stocky man was still cradling his broken wrist, tears streaming down his face. The thin one who had stabbed Marcus was completely unconscious. You didn't have to do that, the customer said quietly, maintaining pressure on Marcus's wound. I had the situation under control. Didn't look that way from where I was standing, Marcus wheezed, trying to manage a weak smile. The customer stared at him for a moment. What's your name? Marcus Rodriguez. I'm Jake Morrison, the customer said. And I need you to know something, Marcus. What you just did, jumping in to protect someone you don't even know, that's not normal. Most people freeze up or run or hide. They don't throw themselves between a knife and a stranger. Marcus was starting to feel dizzy. The warm feeling was spreading and his vision was getting a little blurry around the edges. Seemed like the right thing to do. Jake shook his head. I've served with soldiers who wouldn't have done what you just did. Do you understand that? Before Marcus could answer, he heard sirens in the distance getting closer. The sound was comforting, representing help and safety and the promise that this nightmare was almost over. Tell me something, Jake said, his voice becoming more urgent as the sirens got louder. Do you have family? Someone I should call? No, Marcus said quietly. Just me. Parents died a few years ago. Never married. Jake's expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. No brothers, sisters? Close friends? Not really. I mean, I know people, but... Marcus's voice trailed off. He'd never really thought about how alone he was until now, lying on the floor of his own store with knife wounds, realizing there wasn't anyone who would be devastated to lose him. The sirens were right outside now. Marcus could see flashing red and blue lights through his store windows. Soon the place would be full of paramedics and police officers, and this surreal night would become official reports and hospital paperwork. Marcus, Jake said, leaning closer, I want you to listen to me carefully. You saved my life tonight. I don't know if you realize that, but the angle that guy was coming from, he would have got me in the back, probably hit something vital. You took 3 knife wounds meant for me. Marcus wanted to argue, to say that Jake probably would have been fine, that he was clearly trained for this kind of thing, but the look in Jake's eyes stopped him. This was a man who knew exactly what he was talking about when it came to violence and survival. The store door burst open, and suddenly the place was full of people in uniforms. Paramedics rushed toward Marcus while police officers secured the 3 robbers. Everything became a blur of questions, medical procedures, and radio chatter. As they loaded Marcus onto a stretcher, Jake walked alongside, still shirtless, and now talking to a police detective. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation, something about taking statements, about Jake's identification, about what had happened. Just before they carried Marcus out to the ambulance, Jake leaned down one more time. This isn't over, he said quietly. When you get out of the hospital, we need to talk. There's something I need to tell you. Then Marcus was in the ambulance, oxygen mask over his face, IV needle in his arm, and the store growing smaller through the rear window. The last thing he saw was Jake standing in the doorway, watching him go with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of a decision Marcus couldn't yet understand. Marcus woke up in a hospital bed with the kind of grogginess that comes from serious pain medication. The room was private, which surprised him since his insurance usually meant sharing space with other patients. Afternoon sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across white sheets. His entire torso felt like it was on fire, but a controlled fire. The kind that hurt, but didn't panic him. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as sharp pains shot through his shoulder and side. Easy there, hero. Marcus turned his head to see Jake Morrison sitting in a chair beside his bed. Jake was wearing a clean white button-down shirt and looked like he'd gotten some sleep, which was more than Marcus could say for himself. How long have I been out? Marcus asked, his voice coming out as a croak. About 18 hours, Jake said, reaching for a cup of water on the bedside table. You lost a fair amount of blood and they had to do some surgery on that third wound. The one near your hip nicked something they needed to repair. Marcus accepted the water gratefully. How bad is it? You'll live, Jake said with a slight smile. Doctor says you'll be sore for a while, but no permanent damage. You got lucky. That knife could have hit a lot of things that would have been much worse. Marcus nodded, then looked around the room again. This is a nice room for someone with my insurance. Jake's expression became carefully neutral. I may have made some arrangements. What kind of arrangements? The kind where your medical bills are taken care of and you get the best possible care, Jake said. It's the least I could do. Marcus stared at him. You can't just pay for my hospital bills. You don't even know me. Actually, I know quite a bit about you now, Jake said, pulling a folder from beside his chair. I hope you don't mind, but I did some checking while you were unconscious. The folder was thin, but Marcus could see official-looking documents inside. What is that? Your life mostly, Jake said. Marcus Rodriguez, age 34, born in San Antonio, moved to this city 8 years ago to take care of your mother during her cancer treatment. After she died, you stayed and opened the store. No criminal record, no military service, never even had a speeding ticket. You volunteer at the local food bank on weekends and have never missed a rent payment in 8 years. Marcus felt uncomfortable. You had no right to. I had every right, Jake interrupted, and there was steel in his voice now. When someone saves my life, I need to know who they are. It's not paranoia, Marcus. It's procedure. Procedure for what? Jake was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Are we clear? Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure why. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a Master Sergeant in the Army's 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Do you know what that means? Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Delta Force. That's the popular name, yes. Jake leaned forward in his chair. I was in your neighborhood last night because I was on my way to a safe house. I'd just finished a mission overseas and was in transit to a debriefing when I stopped at your store. A mission overseas, Marcus repeated quietly. The kind I can't talk about. In places I can't name, doing things that officially never happened, Jake confirmed. The point is, Marcus, I've been in combat for 15 years. I've been shot at, blown up, and stabbed more times than I can count. I've fought trained soldiers, terrorists, and professional killers. Marcus waited, sensing there was more. Last night, 3 street criminals almost killed me, Jake continued. Not because they were skilled, but because I was tired, distracted, and not taking them seriously enough. That knife was coming for my back and I wouldn't have seen it in time. But you would have figured it out, Marcus protested. You're trained for this stuff. Jake shook his head. Training doesn't make you invincible, Marcus. It just gives you better odds. Last night my odds ran out and you saved my life. A nurse came in to check Marcus's vitals and change his IV bag. She was friendly and professional, asking how his pain was and whether he needed anything. After she left, Jake continued. I've been thinking about this all night, he said. About what you did and why you did it. Most people in your situation would have hidden behind the counter and let whatever happened happen. But you didn't. I just reacted, Marcus said. I didn't think about it. That's exactly my point, Jake said. When the moment came, when it mattered, your instinct was to protect someone else. Do you know how rare that is? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his bed. I'm not a hero, Jake. I'm just a guy who owns a convenience store. No, Jake said firmly. You're a guy who took 3 knife wounds to protect a stranger. There's a difference. The afternoon sun had shifted and the room was getting dimmer. Marcus could hear the sounds of the hospital around them. Nurses in the hallway, the beeping of monitors, the distant announcement over the intercom. Why are you telling me all this? Marcus asked. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Because I owe you a debt, Marcus. In my world, when someone saves your life, that creates an obligation, a responsibility. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Jake turned back to face him. And I'm going to pay it back. How? Jake smiled, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, it looked genuinely warm. That's what we need to discuss when you get out of here. How would you like your life to change, Marcus Rodriguez? Before Marcus could ask what he meant, Jake's phone buzzed. He looked at it and frowned. I have to go, he said, gathering his folder. My ride is here and I have a plane to catch. Where are you going? Back to work, Jake said. But I'll be in touch soon. Very soon. He headed for the door, then stopped and turned back. Marcus, the 3 guys from last night are all in custody. The leader and the stocky one are in the county jail. The thin one, the one who stabbed you, he's in the medical ward here at the hospital under guard. They're all looking at serious prison time, especially since they assaulted a federal officer. You're a federal officer? Delta Force operators hold federal authority in certain circumstances, Jake explained. What they did to you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Marcus nodded, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. He'd never wanted anyone to go to prison, but they had tried to rob his store and had hurt him badly. One more thing, Jake said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. This number will reach me directly any time, day or night. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. He placed the card on Marcus's bedside table. It was plain white with just a phone number and the name J. Morrison printed in simple black letters. Get some rest, Jake said. When you're feeling better, we have a lot to talk about. Then he was gone, leaving Marcus alone with questions he couldn't answer, and a business card that somehow felt like his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. 3 weeks later, Marcus was back in his store, moving carefully and favoring his left side where the deepest stab wound was still healing. The insurance company had covered most of the damage from the robbery, and he'd managed to reopen after 5 days of cleanup and restocking. The neighborhood felt different now. Word had gotten around about what happened, and Marcus found himself receiving unexpected respect from people who had barely acknowledged him before. Mrs. Chen from the laundromat brought him homemade soup. The teenagers who used to shoplift now nodded politely when they came in. Even the police patrol seemed to stop by more often, but Marcus felt different too. The knife wounds were healing, but something inside him had changed. He found himself more aware of his surroundings, more alert to potential danger. Sometimes he caught himself analyzing customers the way Jake had done, noting their posture, their hand movements, where they looked when they walked in. It was a Tuesday evening when Jake called. How are you feeling? Jake's voice came through clear despite what sounded like a bad connection. Better, Marcus said, closing his store early to take the call in private. Still sore, but the doctor says I'm healing well. Where are you? Can't say, Jake replied. But I wanted to check on you before I ask you something important. Marcus sat down behind his counter. What kind of something important? The kind that might sound crazy at first, Jake said. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Marcus. About what happened, about what you did, and about what comes next. What comes next? I told you I owed you a debt. I meant it. But I've been thinking about this all wrong. This isn't just about paying you back, it's about what you could become. Marcus frowned. I don't understand. You have something, Marcus. Something that can't be taught or trained. When the moment came, when violence erupted around you, you didn't freeze. You didn't run. You didn't think about yourself. You acted to protect someone else. That doesn't make me special. Yes, it does, Jake said firmly. I've worked with soldiers who spent months in training, learning to overcome their natural self-preservation instincts. Most of them never really get there. They follow orders and do their jobs, but when things get really bad, they think about themselves first. It's normal. It's human. Marcus waited, sensing Jake was building up to something, but you didn't have to overcome anything. It was already there, built into who you are. Do you know what that means? Honestly? No. Jake was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could hear what sounded like vehicles in the background, maybe aircraft. It means you have the most important quality we look for in special operations candidates. It means you might have what it takes to do something more than run a convenience store. Marcus felt his heart rate pick up. What are you talking about? I'm talking about giving you a chance to serve your country. I'm talking about training that would turn your natural instincts into professional skills. I'm talking about a life where what you did to save me wouldn't be the exception. It would be the rule. You're talking about the military. I'm talking about special operations. Jake corrected. Not regular military. Something much more specific. Marcus stood up, pacing behind his counter as much as his healing wounds would allow. Jake, I'm 34 years old. I'm out of shape. I've never fired a gun in my life. I don't know anything about being a soldier. Age can be waived for the right candidate. Physical conditioning can be developed. Weapons training can be taught. But courage, real courage, that's something you either have or you don't. And you have it in spades. "This is insane," Marcus said. But even as he said it, he felt something stirring inside him. A possibility he'd never considered, a life he'd never imagined. "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But let me ask you something. Are you happy, Marcus? Really happy? Running your store, living alone, going through the same routine every day?" Marcus stopped pacing. The question hit harder than he'd expected. "It's a good life," he said quietly. "That's not what I asked." Marcus looked around his store. The shelves he'd stocked thousands of times. The register he'd operated every day for 8 years. The apartment upstairs where he spent his evenings watching television alone. "No," he admitted. "I'm not unhappy, but I don't know. I never really thought about whether I was happy. What if I told you there was something else? Something where every day mattered, where what you did could make a real difference in the world?" "I'd say it sounds too good to be true." Jake laughed. "It's not all good, Marcus. The training is harder than anything you can imagine. The work is dangerous. You'd be away from home for months at a time. You might have to kill people. You might get killed yourself." "You're really selling this," Marcus said dryly. "I'm being honest," Jake replied. "But I'm also telling you that it's the most meaningful work I've ever done. Every mission matters. Every operation saves lives or prevents disasters or protects people who can't protect themselves." Marcus thought about the 3 robbers in his store, about how helpless he'd felt until Jake had taken control, about how good it had felt to finally act, to finally do something that mattered. "What exactly are you offering?" "A chance to try," Jake said. "I can't guarantee you'll make it through selection. Most people don't, but I can guarantee you'll get a fair shot. Age waiver, direct entry into the pipeline, and my personal recommendation." "Selection for what?" "I can't say over the phone. But if you're interested, if you're even curious, I can arrange for someone to talk to you in person, someone who can give you the details." Marcus felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff looking down at a drop he couldn't see the bottom of. "When?" "Soon. I'll be back stateside in a few days. I could drive up to see you next weekend. And if I say no, then nothing changes. You go back to your life, I go back to mine, and we both know we did the right thing that night in your store." Marcus walked to his front window and looked out at the street. It was the same view he'd had for 8 years. The bodega across the street, the apartment building next door, the bus stop where the same people waited every morning. "Jake?" "Yeah?" "That night in the store, when you said this wasn't over, is this what you meant?" "Part of it," Jake said. "But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not offering this because I feel guilty or because I owe you something. I'm offering it because I think you could be exceptional at this work. I think you could save a lot of lives, including yours." "Including mine," Jake agreed. "Maybe we could save each other's lives over and over again. Maybe we could be a team." The word team hit Marcus in a way he hadn't expected. He realized that despite living in the same neighborhood for 8 years, despite knowing hundreds of customers, he'd never really been part of anything. He'd never had a partner, a unit, a group of people who depended on him the way he could depend on them. "One question," Marcus said. "Shoot." "That night, when you were fighting those guys, were you holding back?" Jake was quiet for so long that Marcus thought the connection had been lost. "Yeah," Jake finally said. "I was trying not to kill anyone. In my normal work, that's usually not a consideration." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "And if I do this, if I join you, would I have to?" "Yes," Jake said simply. "Sometimes. When it's necessary to protect innocent people or complete the mission." "Could you do that, Marcus?" Marcus thought about the robbers, about the knife coming toward his ribs, about the anger he'd felt when they'd threatened him in his own store. "I think so," he said quietly. "Then think about my offer. I'll call you in a few days to set up a meeting." After Jake hung up, Marcus stood in his store for a long time, looking around at the life he'd built. It was a safe life, a predictable life, a life where the biggest decision he made most days was what to order from his suppliers. But it wasn't the life of someone who had taken 3 knife wounds to protect a stranger. For the first time in years, Marcus Rodriguez began to wonder who he really was and who he might become. Jake arrived on a Saturday morning, driving a nondescript gray sedan that somehow managed to look both ordinary and official at the same time. Marcus had closed the store for the day, something he'd only done twice in 8 years. Once when his mother died, and once when he'd been in the hospital with knife wounds. They sat in Marcus's small apartment above the store, drinking coffee and making small talk until Jake finally got to business. "Before we go any further," Jake said, setting down his mug, "I need you to sign this." He pulled out a document that looked like a cross between a legal contract and a government form. Non-disclosure agreement. What we discussed today can't be shared with anyone ever, even if you decide not to take the offer. Marcus read through it carefully. The language was dense and full of legal terminology, but the basic message was clear. Reveal anything about this conversation and face federal prosecution. "This is serious," Marcus said. "More serious than you know," Jake replied. "But I need you to understand what you'd be signing up for before you make any decisions." Marcus signed the document, and Jake tucked it away in a briefcase Marcus hadn't noticed him carrying. "Okay," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. "Now I can tell you the truth." "I thought you already were." "Partial truth," Jake corrected. "Marcus, I wasn't just a customer who happened to be in your store that night. I was there for a reason." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What kind of reason?" "We'd been watching your neighborhood for 3 weeks. Intelligence suggested that a terrorist cell was using local businesses to launder money and plan operations. Your store was one of several we were monitoring." "My store?" Marcus couldn't hide his shock. "I don't know anything about terrorists." "We know that now," Jake said. "Our intelligence was wrong. It happens more often than we'd like to admit. But that night I was doing surveillance when those 3 idiots decided to rob the place." Marcus tried to process this information. "So you weren't just a random customer?" "No, but everything else I told you was true. You saved my life, and you have qualities we desperately need." Jake stood up and walked to Marcus's small window overlooking the street. "Let me tell you what's really happening out there, Marcus. Things the news doesn't report. Threats most people never hear about." He turned back to face Marcus. 3 weeks ago, we stopped a plan to poison the water supply in a city of 500,000 people. 2 months before that, we prevented a bombing at a children's hospital. Last year, we neutralized a group planning to release biological weapons in subway systems across the country. Marcus felt his mouth going dry. How many people know about this stuff? Very few. The successful operations never make the news. If we do our job right, the public never knows how close they came to disaster. Jake sat back down. "We're good at what we do, Marcus, very good. But we're always undermanned. Always looking for the right people. And people like you, people with natural courage and genuine desire to protect others, are incredibly rare." "What exactly would I be doing?" "Initially, 6 months of the most intensive training you can imagine. Physical conditioning, weapons training, tactical operations, languages, technology, intelligence gathering. Some of it would be here in the States, some overseas." Jake pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus what looked like training schedules and facility photos. "After that, if you make it through, you'd be assigned to a team." "My team, actually." Marcus looked at the images. Obstacle courses that looked impossibly difficult. Classrooms full of serious-faced people studying maps and weapons. Training exercises that looked more like warfare than education. And after training, missions, Jake said simply. Going places other people can't go, doing things other people can't do. Stopping threats before they become headlines. Marcus studied Jake's face. "You really think I could do this?" "Marcus, let me tell you something I haven't told you yet." Jake's expression became very serious. "That night in your store after the paramedics took you to the hospital, I stayed to give my statement to the police." Marcus nodded. "While I was there, one of the robbers, the leader, started talking. He was trying to cut a deal, reduce his charges by providing information." Jake paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "He told the detective that they'd been planning to rob your store for weeks. They knew your routines, your schedule when you closed. But that wasn't the worst part." Marcus felt his heart rate picking up. "What was the worst part?" "They knew you lived alone upstairs. They knew you had no security system. And their plan wasn't just to rob the register." Jake leaned forward. "They were planning to take you upstairs after the robbery. They were going to torture you until you gave them access to your bank accounts, your personal savings, everything you had, and then they were going to kill you." The room suddenly felt very cold. Marcus set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "The only reason they didn't," Jake continued, "was because I was there. And the only reason I lived through it was because you were willing to put yourself between me and a knife." Marcus stared at him. So if you hadn't been there, you'd be dead, Jake said bluntly. And if you hadn't been there, I'd be dead. Two men who were supposed to die that night but didn't, because we saved each other. Jake stood up again, pacing to the window and back. Do you believe in fate, Marcus? I don't know, maybe. I didn't either. Until that night. But now I think maybe something's happened for a reason. Maybe you were supposed to be there. Maybe I was supposed to be there. Maybe we were supposed to meet. Marcus felt overwhelmed. The revelation that the robbers had planned to kill him was shocking enough, but the idea that his entire life might have been leading to this moment was almost too much to process. There's something else, Jake said quietly. Something I probably shouldn't tell you, but I'm going to anyway. He sat back down and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. The mission I was coming back from when I stopped at your store, it didn't go well. We lost two men, good men, guys I'd served with for years. Jake's voice became rougher. I was questioning everything. Whether the work was worth it, whether I wanted to keep doing it, whether I had anything left to give. He paused, collecting himself. And then you threw yourself between me and a knife to protect someone you'd never met. And I realized that as long as there are people like you in the world, the work will always be worth it. Marcus sat in stunned silence. But here's the thing that's going to sound crazy, Jake continued. I think you could have saved those two men we lost. Not that specific mission. You weren't there. But guys like you, people with your instincts, your willingness to sacrifice for others, we need more of them on our teams. Jake reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. This is everything. Training timeline, duty assignments, salary and benefits, family notification procedures if something happens to you. It's a complete picture of what your life would look like if you say yes. He set the folder on the table between them. But before you look at any of that, I need to tell you one more thing. Marcus braced himself for another revelation. If you do this, if you join us, you'll save lives. Probably hundreds of them, maybe thousands. You'll prevent attacks, stop disasters, protect people who will never know your name or thank you for what you did. Jake's voice became very quiet. And someday, maybe someday soon, you might save my life again. And I might save yours. Marcus stared at the folder on his table. Everything he'd ever known about his life, his future, his purpose, seemed to be contained in those documents. How long do I have to decide? As long as you need, Jake said. But Marcus, I want you to know, whatever you decide, meeting you changed something for me. Watching you act without thinking, without fear, just pure instinct to protect someone else. It reminded me why I do this work. Jake stood up and moved toward the door. I'm going to leave you with those documents. Read them, think about them, decide what you want your life to be. He paused at the door. But remember something. 3 weeks ago, you threw yourself between a knife and a stranger because it was the right thing to do. This is just a bigger version of the same choice. After Jake left, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, staring at the folder that might contain his future. For 34 years, he'd lived a quiet, predictable life. He'd never imagined himself as someone who could make a difference in the world. But then again, 3 weeks ago, he'd never imagined himself taking 3 knife wounds to protect a stranger. And as he opened the folder and began to read, Marcus Rodriguez realized that maybe he'd never really known himself at all. Marcus spent the next 3 days reading every page in Jake's folder. The documents painted a picture of a life he could barely imagine, training at facilities he'd never heard of, missions in countries that weren't supposed to exist, work that could save thousands of lives or prevent international disasters. The medical requirements alone seemed impossible. The physical fitness standards looked like they were designed for Olympic athletes. The psychological evaluations would probe every corner of his mind and personality. But it was the mission reports that kept him reading late into the night operations that had prevented nuclear materials from reaching terrorist organizations, rescues of kidnapped civilians from hostile territories, intelligence gathering that had stopped chemical weapons attacks. Each report was heavily redacted, but enough detail remained to show Marcus what his life could become. On Wednesday morning, as he was opening his store, Marcus realized he'd already made his decision. He just hadn't admitted it to himself yet. Mrs. Chen came in for her usual coffee and lottery ticket. You look tired, Marcus. Everything okay? Just thinking about some big changes, he said, ringing up her purchase. Changes can be good, she said with a smile. Sometimes we need to take risks to become who we're supposed to be. After she left, Marcus stood behind his counter and looked around his store one more time. Every shelf, every product, every inch of the place represented 8 years of his life. It was honest work, useful work, but it was also safe work, predictable work, work that wouldn't save lives. He called Jake's number at exactly noon. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," Jake said by way of greeting. "I need to ask you something," Marcus said, "and I need you to be completely honest." "Shoot. Those 2 men you lost on your last mission, if I'd been there, if I'd been trained and ready, could I really have made a difference?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. Maybe. Probably. One of them died because he was trying to protect the team from an ambush. He saw the threat, called it out, and put himself between the enemy and the rest of us. He saved 4 lives by giving up his own. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. "That sounds familiar." "Yeah," Jake said quietly. "It does. The other one? Caught shrapnel from an explosion while covering our extraction. He could have gotten to safety, but he stayed to make sure everyone else got out first." Marcus closed his eyes. 2 soldiers, trained professionals who had died doing exactly what he'd done in his store, putting themselves at risk to protect others. "Jake?" "Yeah? When do we start?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Are you sure?" Jake finally asked. "Once you start this process, there's no going back to your old life. Even if you don't make it through training, even if you change your mind, you can't unknow what you'll learn or undo what you'll see." Marcus looked around his store one more time. "I'm sure. Training starts in 6 weeks. That gives you time to sell the store, settle your affairs, and get in the best physical shape of your life. I'll email you a conditioning program tonight. What about age waivers and all the bureaucratic stuff?" "Already handled," Jake said. "I may have been a little presumptuous, but I started the paperwork after our meeting. You're officially invited to attend selection." Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror. "What are the odds I'll make it through?" "For the average candidate, about 15% make it all the way through to operational status. And for me, higher," Jake said. "Much higher. You've already proven you have the most important quality we look for. Everything else can be taught." Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus's life became a carefully orchestrated dismantling of everything he'd built over the past 8 years. He sold his store to a young couple who promised to keep it as a neighborhood market. He donated most of his furniture to charity and put his few valuable possessions in storage. But the hardest part was the physical training. Jake's conditioning program was brutal: running, swimming, weightlifting, and exercises Marcus had never heard of. His knife wounds ached for the first 2 weeks, but gradually his body began to adapt. Mrs. Chen was the only person he told about his plans, and then only in the vaguest terms. "The military?" she asked, surprised. "At your age?" "Something like that," Marcus said. "It's hard to explain." She studied his face carefully. "This is about what happened during the robbery, isn't it? About the man who helped you?" Marcus nodded. "Good," she said firmly. "You were different after that night. Like you discovered something about yourself you didn't know was there." On his last day in the neighborhood, Marcus walked the streets he'd called home for 8 years. He stopped by the bodega where he'd bought coffee most mornings, said goodbye to the bus driver who'd waved to him every day, and visited the food bank where he'd volunteered on weekends. Everyone wished him well, but Marcus could see the confusion in their eyes. Why would a stable, settled man in his 30s suddenly uproot his entire life? The answer was simple, though he couldn't explain it to them. For 34 years, he'd lived a life that was safe and predictable. 3 weeks ago, he'd discovered that when it really mattered, when lives were at stake, he was someone completely different. Jake picked him up at dawn on a Monday morning in the same gray sedan he'd driven for their first meeting. "Ready?" Jake asked as Marcus threw a single duffel bag in the back seat. "No," Marcus said honestly, "but let's do it anyway." As they drove away from the neighborhood, Marcus watched his old life disappear in the side mirror. The store that had been his world for 8 years, the apartment that had been his home, the quiet routine that had defined his existence. "Any regrets?" Jake asked after they'd been driving for an hour. Marcus thought about it. "Ask me in 6 months. Fair enough." Jake glanced over at him. "But for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice." "Why?" "Because 3 weeks ago, you proved that when good people are in danger, you'll put yourself at risk to protect them. And right now there are a lot of good people in danger." They drove in comfortable silence for another hour before Jake spoke again. "Marcus?" "Yeah?" That night in your store when you jumped over the counter to protect me, in that moment, what were you thinking? Marcus considered the question. I wasn't thinking at all. I just saw you were in trouble and I moved. Jake nodded. That's what I thought. And that's exactly why you're going to be good at this work. As their car merged onto the interstate, heading toward a training facility Marcus couldn't find on any map, he realized that Jake was right. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Rodriguez was heading toward a future where every day would matter, where his actions could save lives, where the courage he'd discovered in himself could make a real difference in the world. He thought about the two soldiers Jake had lost, about the knife that had been heading for Jake's back, about all the future threats they might face together, and for the first time since that night in his store, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The man who had thrown himself between a knife and a stranger was finally going home.